huge thank you to Christina and GPCOG for pulling this summit together and for inviting me with the Portland Regional Chamber and my colleagues, Liz and Rebeccah, up to the stage to kick it off, to talk about or to provide a little context as to why we're here and why the topic of housing is so important. I think the governor, I could probably say ditto to the governor's remarks. She actually said a lot of the things I was going to say, but maybe I'll try to add a little color and just say that the reason the Portland Regional Chamber is here is because of workforce development. And I think the governor made that incredibly clear. I've been with our chamber in one capacity or another for probably the last 16 or 17 years. And we always have a list of policy priorities, and for as long as I can remember, our number one policy priority was workforce development. We absolutely need to attract and to retain workers to the greater Portland region, or we will just die as a region and our economy will dry up. Over the last couple of years, we have noticed a very sizable shift in our policy priorities. Workforce development is still absolutely our number one goal, but we have discovered barriers, pretty significant barriers to workforce development, the number one barrier being housing, which is why we're here. I would say the number two barrier is probably childcare. As my friend Liz and I have had many, many conversations, that could be a totally different summit, but those have become two of the biggest barriers to attracting and to retaining workers. We don't have enough housing. It's not affordable, they can't live in the region, and therefore we're just not hitting those numbers that we need to hit. So all of a sudden, housing has just leapfrogged to the number one thing we talk about at the chamber. It is housing, 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 all day, every day. So that is why I'm here. And it's why the chamber is so invested in this work and so invested in increasing our housing supply, because if we cannot attract workers, we are just going to be in a crisis, basically. I think both Christina and the governor mentioned these numbers, but I think they're worth repeating. And that is Maine needs to build upwards of 84,000 homes by 2030. In that same time frame, we also have to add 75,000 workers to our workforce, and it's no coincidence that those numbers are very closely aligned. We have a demographic cliff. I hate saying that, it's overused, but it's very, very true. We have a whole host of individuals in Maine who are getting ready to retire, and that's fantastic. That's so great for them. One data point we're finding with individuals who are retiring is that they are not leaving Maine. So they're retiring and they're deciding to age in place in Maine, which is also fantastic. Maine's a great place to live, and that's proven by the fact that we're all here and nobody wants to leave. But what's happening is we're seeing our workforce turnover, but we're not seeing our housing stock turnover. So people are leaving the workforce, they're retiring, but they're not leaving their homes. So we have this added complication to our need for housing and the need for workers. They're totally tied and directly related. And the fact that people are staying here, where it's great, it's also a little bit of a complicating factor. I think Christina mentioned this earlier, and thanks to GPCOG, we know that our region needs 24,000 housing units by 2030. One of the challenges we have with that is that 85% of the land in our region does not allow multifamily construction, or they have significant limitations. So if you think about that, we need 24,000 units, but we have a very small swath of land where we can build them. So part of what we need to do collectively is figure out how we remove those regulatory barriers so we can actually build the housing that we need. I know the governor spoke a little bit about this, but recently we have been looking at state level initiatives. I know all of you have as well. Last year we had LD 2003 that passed, which was probably the state's first effort to really look at housing policy, which just shows the level that the level of this crisis that we're in around lack of housing across the state. And we at the chamber have been very supportive of this as well for several reasons. We have seen municipalities recently vote down housing projects. I think Cumberland is the most recent example, which earlier this month, Cumberland voters soundly rejected a project that would have added 170 units to their town center. You know, Cape Elizabeth, another example of a municipality that after a very lengthy municipal process, I think there was 18 meetings, lots of resident engagement, the voters also voted down a project that would have added 49 units. I think local objections is always going to win over statewide interests, which is why we feel really strongly that this conversation needs to be taken up for the municipalities and happening across the state level and happening at a regional level like this. Our municipalities are so small that it's really smart to think about us as a whole region as opposed to the individual municipalities. Because if you think about it, if every single municipality in our region says no to housing, I don't know where that leaves us. If nobody's willing to build any of the 24,000 units that we need, that just leaves us in a really, really critical position. And I also know that I'm probably not the most popular person in this room by saying that, knowing who the audience is, but we at the Chamber look at the region globally. We look at it as a whole and what all the different aspects are that make our region work. We need businesses to be attracted to Greater Portland. We need workers to be attracted here. I think workers are attracted here. We live in a pretty awesome place, but if they can't afford to live here, it's just a non-starter. So we are looking at this much more holistically. We are a regional chamber. We represent Portland and the 7 surrounding communities around Portland. And we also care a lot about the communities that are not in our footprint. We care a lot about Yarmouth. We care a lot about Biddeford and Saco. A lot of our members live there. So we look at us collectively as an entire region and what we as a region need to be doing together. And I think somebody, it might have been the governor who mentioned, or it might have been Jared who mentioned change. And I think one of the reasons why a lot of these housing developments are getting voted down by the residents is people fear change. It's a very normal human reaction. And I think people are looking at growth equals change, which is true. But I'm here to tell you no growth also equals change. Like we will change, change is a constant, change is inevitable. And I would think if we are going to change, don't we want to be on the side of impacting that change and actually structuring what that change looks like and making sure that that change fits within our community and that we have the resources and the support to actually lift up that change. So I want this group to just take away that we are going to change as a region, and I think we really want to make that change intentional going forward. And so I encourage everybody to look at it that way and try to take the fear factor out of growth. And I think the last thing that I'll say is just when you think of our communities, you know, we want our communities to be able to house those who currently live there and those who want to live there, who are really going to add to the economy and add to the fabric of our communities. We want our children to be able to leave their parents' houses and live in the communities where they grew up. Maybe rent an apartment there, eventually buy a first home there, raise their family there, and then on the back end, people who are retiring, we want them to be able to leave their family home that they lived in for 30 years, buy a condo in that community. So we really need housing of all levels to support all people in all different phases of their life. So I think today is such an incredible opportunity to bring all of you together. I encourage you to take off your municipal hats and put on your regional hats and just think about this need for housing as a region and the role each municipality can play in addressing the needs around housing. So I want to thank you for having me here. Christina, thank you for the invitation to be here, and I'm really excited to be a part of today's conversation. And just know the Portland Regional Chamber stands ready to help in housing however we can. It is our #1 issue. Thank you.
Hi everyone, Liz Cotter, Schlax, President and CEO of United Way of Southern Maine, and we do work in the housing space. And today I'm going to use my few minutes to introduce you to some data that we will not have time to deep dive into today, but that I want you to know we have, and we want to support you in your efforts to support your communities. And this data really helps to highlight the challenge that we all know intuitively is happening in our community related to housing affordability. So let's see if I can get the technology to operate. It works, I love it. Okay, so I have a couple of quick slides here where we are going to talk about this new data program that our community has entered into in the state of Maine with all the United Ways in Maine, sponsored generously by the John T. Gorman Foundation, which is a data project called United for Alice. And who is ALICE that we're talking about? And that acronym is used in lots of different ways, but today we're talking about people who are asset limited, income constrained, employed. Those are the frontline workers that we were all spending lots of time talking about, thinking about, and caring about for a few key years recently. They are the people that make our economic engine grow and go in our state, and they are people who are struggling right now and have been for decades to meet a basic budget to be able to afford the basic cost of living. And as we've heard here today, what are those basics? Food, shelter, those basics. And so shelter is obviously a key element of what we're talking about here. One of the things that may surprise you, because we are used to talking about the federal poverty level, and that is a number that many of us are familiar with. A lot of our benefit programs are based on the federal poverty level. That's terminology that many of us are familiar with. And in southern Maine, you can see on the graph on the right, that 9% of people in southern Maine, of the 220,000 households, this is by households, 9% of those households would be categorized as at the federal poverty level or below. However, an additional 29% of households are what we would call in that ALICE category. These are people who are working. These are people who are struggling. And so when you combine those together, you get 38% of households in our area that struggle every month to meet a basic survivability budget. In the state of Maine, you'll see on the larger pie on the left, that's 42% in the whole state. But we're not that different here in southern Maine. And don't worry, all of this data is available online, and I want you to dig into it, so we'll get you that information. But one of the key things that we wanted to talk about today, and one of the reasons we're here, is, as you can imagine, the ALICE population, while it does encompass all ages, all genders, all ethnicities, some groups experience hardship at greater rates than others. That will not surprise you. And this is where we're talking about equity in our community as well. And so those who are under 25 and over 65 are struggling more than the rest of the population. 65% of Black households and 52% of Asian households in southern Maine are struggling at that ALICE level or below. And the staggering statistic of 68% of female-headed households in southern Maine are struggling to meet that basic survivability budget. So what is that budget that we're talking about? Well, this ridiculous, may I say, federal poverty level budget would tell you that a single adult could live on about $13,000 a year. And it would also say that a family of 4 could somehow magically live on $26,500. So we can immediately disregard that as ridiculous. But this survivability budget, which is based on real data, real costs in our real area, tells us that $35,000 is needed for a single adult, approximately, to live in our area, and $80,000 is needed for a family of 4 with 2 kids in childcare. What's included in this survivability budget? Just these basics: housing, childcare, technology, healthcare, just those basic things. You don't see birthday presents on here, you don't see saving for retirement, you don't see a family vacation. This is the basics. And here are the details related to that, but I just want to bring you to the bottom line, which is an hourly wage of $17.35 is required for a single adult here, and that 2 adults, 2 children, about $40, that household wage between those 2 adults. I also want to, and I wanted to show you, of course, as you know, the extremely high percentage of that household budget that is related to housing and the utilities that go along with it. Not a surprise to you, but that's why housing affordability is essential to the discussion of people's ability to survive on a basic budget. I think that was probably intuitive for you, but you can see the data here. And we can see that of those Alice families, it is more than about 49% of those families are spending more than 30% of their income on housing, which we know is the threshold for affordability. Why? Because you need that other 70% of your income to pay for all the other stuff besides housing. So you're shirking or you're scrimping on all those other things if you are paying too much for your housing. So what can you do? You can become more aware of this data and information. You can use the tools at your disposal related to policy, related to advocacy, related to information to employers and others in your community around these issues. And we welcome you to be a partner with us as we work on housing affordability, as we work on the basic cost of living for the families in our community who keep our engine running. Thank you so very much.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Rebeccah Sanders. I'm the CEO of the Natural Resources Council of Maine. And for over 60 years, NRCM has worked to protect, conserve, and restore Maine's environment and protect the nature of Maine. And I don't think there's any day that our team doesn't wake up that we don't think about climate change. And so today I'm here to talk to you about how we're thinking about climate change and the intersection with housing and housing development. You know, over the last couple of months, I think we can't deny that we're seeing climate in our daily lives. These last couple of storms that have lashed our shores and destroyed some historic structures and damaged our homes, our businesses, and our community infrastructure really tell us that we don't have much time to waste and that we need to take action now. So how do we do this in a way that still meets growing community needs? And why am I here talking to you about this as the Natural Resources Council of Maine, talking about housing? Well, housing is responsible for about 19% of our greenhouse gas emissions in the state of Maine. And so for us, housing issues are climate issues. We can't separate those two things. Tackling the climate crisis today and for tomorrow actually gives us an opportunity in the way that we like to think about it at NRCM, which is an opportunity to rethink how we live, where we build, and what we prioritize going forward. Maine has done an incredible job of continuing to adopt energy efficient strategies and drive weatherization that improves energy efficiency of our existing homes and building infrastructure. But as we look to the future, we really need to think about the incentives to do that up front. How much we love our Maine villages where people can walk downtown and see each other, go to the library. I was just talking about with my table mate over there, go to the grocery. How much of that feels like that's a central part of who we are in the state of Maine. As we think about housing development moving forward, how can we continue to do that, build more communities that embrace that also think about bikeability, walkability, and lowering our need for traveling by car, which is Maine's actual largest contributor to our carbon emissions. So smart design also increases our opportunity to embrace the benefits of natural infrastructure. The nature of Maine is one reason that so much of us love where we live and one of the drivers for people coming to Maine. And we think that denser housing actually is sort of antithetical to that, that you're living in a subdivision and you're not going to be able to access those forests and fields and streams and ponds that you all love. But if you design well, you can actually create clear pathways to access nature that also will build upon and embrace the ecosystem services that our fields, our wetlands, and our ponds and forests provide to us, sequestering carbon and addressing things like these increasing rain events, where they'll actually be able to absorb the water that's falling without needing to build as much gray infrastructure to do that work. As we face the increasing need for housing in Maine, it's imperative that climate considerations are incorporated into our strategies and that we protect the nature of what makes Maine so special. We know that climate is going to drive more people to come to our amazing state, at the same time that many communities around the coasts and our rivers are having to think about managed retreat from those areas. So as we think about this, we know there's a potential for inequitable results for those people, as we were just talking about, that have fewer resources. NRCM is looking forward to partnering with you in this sort of new space for us and how we think about creating new homes for the people of Maine and doing it in a way that allows us to thrive in a climate-altered future. Thank you so much.
Thank all of you. Thank you so much for sharing. I think you've all made the point that if you care about the economy, if you care about climate and open space, if you care about social and racial equity, then we all have a stake in our housing success together. So thank you very much. One more round of applause for our panelists.